Panya, I don't see your video.
Okay, so the recording should be on now. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Global Network webinar. My name is Panya Yu from the United Nations Statistics Division, and I will be moderating this webinar together with my colleague, Alexander Loschke. So as many of you know, this webinar is organized by the Global Network of Data Officers and Statisticians. We use our online discussion group on Yammer to share knowledge on various areas of data and statistics. If you're not a member already, we invite you to join us, and we'll share a link to do so in the chat box shortly. Today, we are very delighted to welcome Anders Humlum from the Booth School of Business at the University of Chicago. Anders will be presenting on the topic of the adoption of ChatGPT. So in a recent paper, Anders and his co-author investigated the adoption of ChatGPT, the icon of generative AI, using a large-scale survey experiment linked to comprehensive register data in Denmark. Surveying 18,000 workers from 11 exposed occupations, they documented that ChatGPT is widespread, but substantial inequalities have emerged. For example, women are 16 percentage points less likely than men to have used the tool for work. Furthermore, despite its potential to lift workers with less expertise, users of ChatGPT already earned slightly more before its arrival. The workers see a substantial productivity potential in ChatGPT, but are often hindered by employer restrictions and the need for training. Anders is going to kindly cover these and other key findings from the survey in the next hour or so. Let me also quickly introduce our speakers. Anders is an assistant professor of economics and Fujimori Mu faculty scholar at the Booth School of Business at the University of Chicago. He studies the impact of technological change on the economy and how educational policies may help workers adapt to new technologies. Anders received his PhD in economics from Princeton in 2020. Just a few housekeeping reminders. Anders will have 35 to 40 minutes to present. We will then have a Q&A session following his presentation. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to write your comments and questions in the chat box at any time. And during the Q&A session after the presentation, you are encouraged to ask your questions directly by using the raise hand function. If you are unable to turn on your microphone or camera, you could also read out your questions to Anders on your behalf. Just let us know. And as usual, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the global network after the event. We invite you to continue the discussion there after this webinar. And with that out of the way, let me now turn over the floor to you, Anders, for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Let me share my screen here and go full screen. Yeah, so with that introduction, let me just jump right into it. This is a research project that is a joint work with Emilie Vestergaard, who's a brilliant PhD student at the University of Copenhagen. So the title of the paper is The Adoption of ChatGPT. The majority of my talk will focus on that first paper. This is ongoing work, and we are actually now able to track these workers in their labor market outcomes. So we'll at the end be able to study actually the short-run effects of these adoption decisions. Do we actually see that workers who have adopted generative AI, and in particular ChatGPT, are doing better in the labor market? Okay, so starting with the first question of the adoption of ChatGPT. So ChatGPT really marks the era of generative AI, in which several high-skilled occupations may be disrupted. So in this research project, we ask three fundamental questions. So first, who has adopted ChatGPT? Second, how do workers anticipate this tool to impact their jobs? And finally, why do some workers use ChatGPT and others not? So to answer these three questions, we conducted a large-scale survey of 11 exposed occupations in Denmark. And then we took these survey answers and linked them to very detailed administrative data on workers' earnings, experience, demographics, allowing us to get a really nuanced picture of who have embraced this frontier technology. And then in this paper, we will examine in particular how workers' beliefs and potential adoption barriers are deciding or determining who has used this tool and who has still not have adopted it thus far. Okay, so how did we collect this data? This was a collaboration with Statistics Denmark, where we invited 100,000 workers from November last year to January this year. And these 100,000 workers all were employed in 11 exposed occupations. And I'll give you the list of occupations in a second. Now, why the Danish context? It really unlocks two key advantages for this study. The first key advantage is that Statistics Denmark has very detailed occupational codes on every individual worker in Denmark. So that allows us to make this survey very targeted to the workers that we actually think this tool is relevant for. So these could be software developers, journalists, marketing professionals, and so forth. We were able to really target these occupations. The second key advantage for this study is that every Dane has a so-called digital mailbox that the government uses to send important information about their taxes and so forth, but that Statistics Denmark also has the authority to send survey invitations to. So that means that we can really get a very large and representative sample of workers in these exposed occupations. So I think that really is important because otherwise we may end up in with very selected samples. For example, you could imagine that everyone who have signed up for this talk have some interest in AI and in ChatGPT in particular, but we want to go beyond the people that are just intrinsically interested in the technology to get a more representative and comprehensive picture of how many workers are actually using the tools and how do workers anticipate this tool to impact their jobs. So we collected 18,000 complete and valid responses, and we can show in the paper that these 18,000 responses represent representative samples. So they are balanced on the covariates like earnings, gender, age, and furthermore, there are several variables such as workers' experience and expertise and their tasks that they hold that we both measure in the survey as well as in the register, allowing us to validate that these two measures line up for the variables that we can measure both in the survey and in the register. So just to take stock of the data here, we really have a large scale representative and high quality survey linked to comprehensive admin data on the backgrounds of these workers. I think it's a really exciting data set that allows us to get a really unique picture of who have adopted this tool. Okay, so jumping right into the first key result. So here I plot for each of our 11 occupations the share of workers who are aware of the tool, who have used the tool, who have used it at work, and who have used it at a core task, where the core task definition is based on the ONET survey that some of you may know, where we asked about several tasks in their occupations. Then we ask whether this task was an important task for them, and then whether they were using it for this important core task. Okay, so what does this figure tell you? The first takeaway is that ChatGPT is already pervasive in these 11 exposed occupations. So across the board, just on average, more than half of these workers have used ChatGPT at any given point. Now, the adoption rates vary across occupations. And in particular, you see that it's occupations that are either have writing text as a core task, like marketing professionals or journalists, or who are into the technology sector themselves, software programmers, who have adopted this tool faster, in particular in their jobs. Then at the bottom rungs of this ranking, we have workers such as accountants, financial advisors, that are either handling very confidential data, financial advisors, for example, handling your banking statements, or where being correct is a core part of the task. Like, for example, with a legal in legal work, meeting legal standards is of course a necessary condition for the value added that they're providing. So we're going to dive into and understand what are driving these differences across occupations in a bit. So it's not all workers who have ever used ChatGPT who are still currently using it. So here we ask, what are the share of workers who have used ChatGPT in the last 2 weeks? So these are active users of this tool. And here we see that it's about 40% who are still actively using the tool. And then we can go even further and ask who has an active Plus subscription. So these are the Plus account where you're a paid subscriber to this tool. So these are, in some sense, super users. They're willing to pay for using the tool. So we should expect them to also really use it more intensively. And we see that among these, among all workers, it's only around 7% who are Plus subscribers. So there's a large share of workers who have played around with this tool and who are using it somewhat, but there's a smaller share who are actually paying for it. The second thing we want to do is that we want to go inside each of these 11 occupations and ask what characterizes workers who have jumped into this new technology. So this is what this regression table shows here. So in the first 5 columns, I just show univariate correlations within occupations. So for example, in the first column, I take all paralegals, and then I ask, do younger paralegals, are they more likely to have adopted this tool? And then in the last 2 columns, I run a multivariate regression where I'm throwing all the variables in there and seeing in a horse race which are the strongest predictors of the adoption of ChatGPT. And then in the very last column, I even control not only for workers' occupations, but for workers' workplaces and tasks. So now in this last column, we are comparing 2 workers, for example, 2 paralegals working in the same legal firm, handling the same type of legal task. Okay, so let me walk you through what the key insights are from this table. The first 2 rows shows that it is younger and less experienced workers who have adopted ChatGPT at work. So, for example, every year of age or experience is associated with, or every year younger is associated with around 0.7 percentage points higher likelihood of having used ChatGPT at work. So this pattern of selection of younger and less experienced worker makes sense from what we know about this tool. We have good evidence from randomized control trials showing that it is workers with less experience and expertise who have the most to gain from this tool. So for example, if I'm just starting to learn a programming language, I have much more to gain and to learn from having access to this tool, helping me with guidance into the syntax of the programming language. And we see this showing up, that it is the workers with less experience in their jobs who have embraced this tool faster. Now, despite the fact that users of ChatGPT are younger, less experienced, they actually earned slightly more already before ChatGPT was even invented. So this shows that workers who are lower achieving workers within their cohort of similar age and experience may need some further guidance and assistance to help them adopt this tool. So I think the second finding is a surprising one, because there had been predictions that this tool could help alleviate existing inequalities exactly because it helps workers with less expertise and experience. But thus far, we don't see that showing up in the data, in the sense that this third row showing that workers who are using the tools are the high achieving workers who were earning more already before ChatGPT was even launched. Now, the last row here of this table shows a staggering gender gap in the adoption of ChatGPT. In particular, take two workers in the same occupations. We take, for example, two software developers. Then we compare males to females. We see that the female software developers are 16 percentage points less likely to have used ChatGPT as well. This is a really large and substantial gender gap that we had not anticipated before conducting this survey. It was a real surprise to us, but it seems to now replicate in many other contexts. It seems to be a very general phenomena, and we can study this gender gap within each of these 11 occupations, and in all of these 11 occupations, the female workers are substantially less likely to have used ChatGPT. And if we focus in on more intense adoption measures, such as whether you're using it for core tasks at work, the relative importance of gender only increases. So I think this is a really surprising finding, and I think there's much more follow-up work to be done, really unpacking what are driving these gender differences. I'll get into it a little bit in this talk. Okay, so this was the first part of the paper, which was in some sense a descriptive study of who have adopted this tool. The second thing we want to ask in this project is, how do workers anticipate this tool to impact their jobs? So now we're asking real journalists or teachers or software developers how this tool might impact their jobs. So the first finding is that workers in these exposed occupations see a substantial productivity potential in this tool. So the average worker states that ChatGPT can halve their working times in a third of their job tasks. So this is really an astounding number. I had not anticipated these large magnitudes. It really shows that ChatGPT and generative AI is not just hype among tech experts. If you ask a representative worker in the exposed occupations, they do confirm that there seems to be a potential to improve productivity and save time. in the relevant job tasks. The second finding is that workers in these exposed occupations understand that the way that ChatGPT benefits workers is by helping workers with less expertise. So we see this showing up in that when workers are asked about, well, how large are the time savings for workers with greater expertise, they say that the time savings are smaller. So this is, I think, also remarkable that workers have this understanding that the way that ChatGPT is boosting productivity is mainly by substituting for expertise in the relevant tasks. The third finding is that 40% or 38%, so substantial share of the workers who say they can save time with ChatGPT say they will not perform more of the task that ChatGPT helps them save time in. So one example where this share is very high is, for example, school teachers. More than 70% of school teachers say they will not perform more of the tasks that ChatGPT saves time in. So I think this makes sense because suppose that I could use ChatGPT to help me grade essays. That might actually speed up the grading, but in the short run, I will not have more essays to grade. So I think this is important because it shows that at least in the short run, before firms and sectors have reorganized their work around ChatGPT, we should maybe not expect these large expansions in output. So I think this is could partly reflect that this is a short-run picture. Maybe in the longer run, as firms start to reorganize around these tools, we will see larger expansions also in output in response to the time saving from this tool. Now, the fourth finding and final finding about the beliefs of ChatGPT is that workers say they're very uncertain about these assessments. So there's a lot of heterogeneity in their beliefs, and they say they're highly certain about the estimating time savings. And I think this makes sense in the sense that just the large language models that are powering ChatGPT are evolving continuously. New versions are being launched, and also new use cases are being found all the time. I think there's a good case to be made that ChatGPT or large language models more generally falls into the class of so-called general purpose technologies, which has use cases in a vast domain of occupations and sectors. Okay. So the third thing we want to do is to understand, well, how do these optimistic beliefs about ChatGPT and its time savings then map into workers' actual use of the tool? So let me walk you through how what these charts show. So here I show on the left, I split left and right, I split workers into whether they have ever used ChatGPT or have never used ChatGPT. So people on the left here have some experience with ChatGPT. This could be at home, it could be at work. They have some experience using the tools. The workers on the right here have never used the tool. Then I take all the job tasks of these workers, and then in the inner ring, I ask what is the share of the job task where workers say that ChatGPT can deliver large time savings. And large time savings here are defined as being able to halve your working time at equal quality. So what does equal quality means? The definition we used is that if someone reviewed your work, they would not be able to assess whether you have completed it with or without assistance from ChatGPT. Okay, so this is what the inner ring circle shows here. Then in the outer ring, we take each of these job tasks and ask whether workers are intending to use ChatGPT in each of these tasks. Okay, so what does this chart shows? The first finding is that workers see large potential time savings from this tool. So this is what the blue segment shows here, regardless of the actual experience with the tool. So this shows that there's a general sense that this tool might be beneficial, regardless of whether people have actually used it or not. Okay, the second finding is that if you look at workers who have never used the tool, very few of them are actually looking to use it in the future. So for example, even among the 31% of the job tasks where these never users are saying that ChatGPT could halve their working time, only around 3% of these job tasks or these workers are intending to use ChatGPT going forward. So I think this shows that sometimes in the technology diffusion literature we talk about S-shapes or S-diffusion curves. I think what this chart on the right shows is that we are beyond the inflection point of this S-shape, and the speed of adoption for ChatGPT might be slowing, in the sense that workers who have not used this tool thus far are not right now looking to start using it anytime soon. Now, the third and maybe more surprising finding is that even among workers who have used the tool, so they understand the technology, they're able to log into ChatGPT and have played around with the prompt, and they say that ChatGPT can halve their working times, still more than 60% of these workers say they're not intending to use ChatGPT at work. So this seems like a big puzzle here, and these workers know the technology, say it could save them time, not intending to use it. It suggests that there must be something that prevents these workers from reaping the full benefits of this tool in their jobs. So this is the next thing we do in this survey is we ask them why. Why are workers not using ChatGPT if they say it could save them time? So here on the just a second, sorry. So here on the next slide, we'll ask what are preventing workers from using ChatGPT, even when they say, or despite the fact that they say that ChatGPT could help them save time. Okay, so this is what this plot shows. We're zooming in on this gray segment here that I highlighted with the red lines, and asking what are preventing workers from using ChatGPT despite saying that it could save them time in their jobs. And then we're splitting the answers again by whether workers have ever used ChatGPT, this is the red bars, or whether workers have never used the tool. So the first finding here is that a substantial fraction of workers say they need some training to use the tool. This is particularly the case for workers who have never used the tool. So for example, older workers and especially also female workers say that they need some training before they can really leverage and take advantage of the time savings in their jobs. The second finding is that there's a substantial fraction of workers who are simply not allowed to use ChatGPT at work. So we saw this very early on. For example, with the financial advisors, a lot of banks simply shut down the use of ChatGPT early on. And of course, that's a very legitimate reasons for not using the tool at work if your employer are not allowing it. And we see that this is particularly the case with workers who have ever used the tool. They may have tried it at home, but they're still not able to really leverage the tool at work simply due to employer restrictions. So I think this shows that some of the key barriers to adopting ChatGPT at this point might be related to firm policies, or at least something firms and employers have under their control, in the sense that it is employers, of course, that are directly controlling whether workers are allowed to use it, but employers might also be in a particular positioned place to facilitate, for example, employer training of these tools. And in some sense, it's quite surprising that such a large share of workers say they need training to use ChatGPT, because some of the genius elements of ChatGPT is that it is fairly easy to use, is that it is this large language models, but it has it's a chatbot interface. It's very easy to interact with just using natural language. You don't need any particular technical training in terms of programming language to access this tool. So I think this really shows that there might be some low-hanging fruit for employers just to provide that training, one-day crash course in using ChatGPT, and then helping workers integrate the tool into their daily work. Now, the second and final finding from this bar shows that what are the types of barriers that didn't seem to be very relevant. And here we are plotting more existential fears of, for example, being replaced, or being redundant in your job, or becoming dependent on this technology. Only or less than 10% of workers report that as a reason for not using ChatGPT. So this really shows that these more existential fears of unemployment or technology dependencies at this point doesn't really seem to be the main barrier for using ChatGPT. It's much more these very practical reasons, such as employer restrictions or need for training. Okay, so in the last part of the talk here, I will now shift gears and ask whether these adoption decisions that we've now documented, do we actually already see them mattering for labor market outcomes? Like, for example, we see that women are much less likely to use ChatGPT. Should we already now be worried that they're falling behind in the labor market and earning less? So I think this is a completely open question, and my priors were not that strong before diving into this. So let me just give you 3 quick reasons why you might expect ChatGPT to really have mattered for the earnings of workers and why they may not. So first, we already showed, and it has been documented or in other surveys, that ChatGPT is really a once in a decade, maybe in a lifetime, at least in a decade, technology, in the sense that it's the fastest diffusing technology ever. So this seems to be a really a tool that seems to be relevant for a large set of workers. Workers have really jumped into it. Second, as I showed earlier, workers in the exposed occupations really see a substantial productivity potential of this tool. And this finding, or these beliefs from workers, are backed up by real evidence from randomized controlled trials, showing that if you provide access to ChatGPT to, for example, text writers, this is a paper published in Science, or to customer support agents, this is forthcoming in the QGE. There are also other papers studying consultant. It shows that access to ChatGPT can really help save time without sacrificing on the quality of work. And this is especially the case for workers with less experience. So just from that set of so these are the 3 green dots here: fast diffusion, large adoption, and RCT showing productivity gains, you might expect this to really matter already now for worker earnings. So 3 reasons why you might not be skeptical about this is that there's also been good evidence showing that whether ChatGPT is really useful or not for you depends very much on the task you're using it for. So this paper, which is coming out in Nature, did the same experiment as the first RCTs, but then they varied the job task. And in particular, they gave access to ChatGPT for tasks where ChatGPT was not that well suited. For example, at that point, downloading a spreadsheet, doing some calculations, and inferring something from those spreadsheet calculations. And they showed for those types of tasks, actually having access to ChatGPT was detrimental for workers' productivity. So this was an experiment among consultants in the Boston Consulting group, and these BCG consultants actually suffered from having access to ChatGPT. The second and last two reasons why you might be skeptical is that thus far, there's really been limited firm-wide adoption of ChatGPT. It's actually quite remarkable that we've seen this fast diffusion of a production technology, but it has all been from the bottom up. So workers embracing and jumping into this technology, whereas whereas employers and firms are actually either passive or even restricting the tool or restricting the use of this tool at workplace. Then finally, you might just think that the reason why men are using this tool is that this is the new digital gadget and it's not really providing any gains from this productivity gains for them in their workplace. Okay, so why is this a challenging question to answer? Is that it's not random which workers have adopted ChatGPT, in the sense that we already saw that it's, for example, younger workers, workers with less experience, and higher achieving workers who have adopted ChatGPT. Okay, so how are we going to make progress on this? So this was a little bit of a long-winded introduction. What allows us to answer this question and make progress is that we take now these survey responses and then we link it to the labor market outcomes of workers after the arrival of ChatGPT. So now we have data at the individual level on earnings and employment of these workers, allowing us to see whether workers who have used this tool actually are faring better. And then the strategy will compare adopters versus non-adopters before and after ChatGPT. And we also, furthermore, in order to address this selection issue, are going to exploit these employer restrictions, which in some sense created a natural experiment for us, in the sense that two legal professionals who are otherwise similar might be employed in different firms that had different policies with respect to the use of ChatGPT, and in particular the paralegal that were employed in the legal firm where they were not allowed to use ChatGPT is a natural control worker who were not allowed to use the tool despite his underlying interest in using it. Okay, so just starting with these restrictions on use, we're now asking, well, what were the firms that were restricting the use of ChatGPT? And here we are again plotting the 11 exposed occupations. And then now we're splitting workers based on whether they're employed in a large firm, so these are firms that are above the median size within the occupations, or smaller firms. So the first finding here is that this ranking is almost the reverse mirror image of the ranking we saw in terms of adoption. So workers who have or occupations that have used ChatGPT a little, for example, financial advisors or legal professionals, are those that are most likely to be restricted in their use from their employers. So again, I think this makes total sense that these occupations are either handling confidential material like financial advisors or something where being correct is crucial. But then within occupations, we see that the firms that are using or have the firms that have restricted the use of the tools are more likely to be larger firms. So I think this was a little bit surprising in the sense that usually we think that these larger, more productive firms are exactly more productive because they're embracing new technologies and always at the frontier of the technology curve. But with ChatGPT, we saw the exact opposite. And I think the reason is that, at least in the short run, these larger, more profitable firms had simply too much to lose from any scandals coming out from using ChatGPT or misusing it in terms of uploading, for example, confidential data for financial advisors. Okay, so here I just show in the first panel or in the first two columns here, I compare what are the characteristics of the workers that are either restricted and the difference between restricted versus non-restricted workers. And the first panel here just shows that there is a first stage effect on their adoption of ChatGPT. So workers who are restricted were also less likely to have used the tool at work for job tasks or even having a Plus subscription. The second panel here shows, this is a balance check in some sense, showing that workers who are restricted were on average not that different from workers who are not restricted in their same occupations. The only slight misbalance we have here is that they seem to earn a little bit more, the workers that are restricted, but this is really only coming or fully coming from the fact that they were employed in larger, more productive firms. Okay, so now turning to the results here, we're asking whether workers who are using ChatGPT now have benefited in the labor market from the use of this tool. So this is a simple difference in means, comparing workers in the same occupation, age, experience, and gender category, and then asking whether workers who have adopted this tool at work are also earning more. And then this vertical dashed line marks the launch of ChatGPT in November 22. Okay, so what the blue graph shows here is that workers who are using ChatGPT do indeed earn more, and they earn on average 6 to 7% more in the labor market. So the outcome here is log earnings, so you can interpret the scale here as percentage effects. So it seems that just focusing on what workers are earning now, there could be something to this tool actually have boosted their earnings. But then the key benefits of our data is that we have the panel dimension of this admin data, so we can follow these workers back in time. And then when we do that, we get this picture, showing that workers who are using ChatGPT now, yes, they're earning more, but they earned more already before the arrival of ChatGPT. These are simply just higher achieving workers selecting and jumping into this tool. And there does not seem to be, at least now, yet a clear break that after the arrival of this tool, they're starting to earn more. So one way to do that is that we can do a difference in difference, where we're just indexing this difference in means relative to the launch of ChatGPT. And we see that ChatGPT has really thus far not have a significant impact on the earnings of workers. We can reject earnings effects that are larger than like 2 or 3 percentage points. And again, we can do the same things. So before we were just comparing adopters to non-adopters, we can also do this design where we instead comparing restricted versus non-restricted workers, which alleviate this selection effect. And now we actually see that workers who are non-restricted, so more likely to use ChatGPT, they earn slightly less. This is coming from this selection effect from the firm side, that larger firms were more likely to restrict the use. But then again, if we do a different diff, we get the same picture. There's not a sense in which workers who were not restricted in their use of ChatGPT and therefore better able to access the tool at work are now earning more in the labor market. Okay, so with those with those findings, let me wrap up and give you the key insights and takeaways from this study. So the first half of the talk was about the adoption of ChatGPT. And here we see that ChatGPT is already pervasive in the exposed occupations. Half of workers in these occupations have used the tools, but substantial inequalities in the use of ChatGPT has already emerged. In particular, women, if you just look at whether they've ever used the tool, are on average 20 percentage points less likely to have used the tool relative to a worker in their same occupations. We also see that despite the fact that this tool could help alleviate existing inequalities, actually workers who are using the tool right now earned more already before the arrival of ChatGPT. Second, we see that workers see a substantial productivity potential in this tool, state that it could halve their working times in a third of their job task, but a substantial share of these workers are hindered in the use of ChatGPT, either from employers explicitly restricting the use of ChatGPT, or them stating and reporting that they need some training before they can take advantage of this tool. And I think this really puts firms and corporations in a unique position to facilitate the further adoption of ChatGPT, in the sense that workers who are saying that they never tried ChatGPT and not intending to use it going forward, they really point to the need for training to help them overcome that barrier. So I think the next chapter of the adoption curve here will really put firms in a very important role of driving the further adoption of ChatGPT. And then the last part here, which is ongoing work, studying the effects of these adoption decisions in the labor market. We see that, at least thus far, we shouldn't be too worried about non-users falling behind, in the sense that ChatGPT thus far has had limited causal effect of worker earnings. Yes, ChatGPT users are earning more, but that's because they're just the high ability workers who would have earned more regardless. It's really reflecting that selection effect and not the causation. So to be clear, these are short-run effects. We see that workers say they can save time using the tool, so it could be that it just takes some time for those time savings to really manifest in the earnings, but thus far we don't see large effects on outcomes. Okay, so with that, let me thank you all for listening, and let me open up for questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Anders, for this fascinating presentation. First of all, congratulations on the research, and I'm very happy to hear that this is ongoing work and you will update the findings and hopefully ask new questions. I think a few things really struck me as you were presenting. And first of all, just from the perspective of data and statistics, you've struck gold here. The ability to reach out to so many people and to get a pretty sizable response rate, and that the ability to match quite precisely the answers to your survey to administrative data. I mean, that's a researcher's dream. Secondly, the main question about productivity gain in ChatGPT, the finding that for people who adopt it, they could have their working times and up to a third of the task. When was the last technological advance that saved people so much time, right? I mean, given, let's say, a typical 8-hour working day, this may translate to a saving of up to an hour and a half out of that. So that's significant. And lastly, I think your finding about the main barrier to adoption being the need for training, and probably training is just as simple as producing a 15-minute video on how to create an account and how to get started. That's also quite baffling. With that said, I have already enabled the camera and microphone, and I want to take a couple of questions from the chat first before we go to the live audience. I see a couple of questions from Aida and from Jav Klan. I wonder if you want to just come online and ask your questions yourselves.
Yes, thank you. This is Aida. Thank you very much, Anders, for this beautiful presentation. I'm going to read the working paper as well. Just a quick question based on your presentation. Since there is a significant gender gap in the use of the tool, was there an analysis by gender on reasons for not using the tool? And if this has not been done, will this be something that you explore in your future plans? Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks, Aida. Yeah, maybe Anders, can we take another question and then
okay, let me just write that. Let me just write it down then before.
Sure.
Hello, thanks. This is Jiao.
Yeah.
Just to give you a minute to.
Yeah, I'm ready. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. First of all, wonderful presentation and wonderful depth of, I would say, a very hot topic that many would like to use it. I think many uses it, but on a corporate or organization level, it's being challenged. So my question relies on that, how an organization could overcome these obstacles. And once they use it, their product or whatever their content, how do they ensure the transparency with the end user who are consuming those content? Either it fully or partially processed by, let's say, tools like ChatGPT and Gemini. Thank you. Once again, I'll be reading your full paper and happy to hear it's an ongoing work. Thank you so much.
Okay, over to you, Anders, before we take another round of questions.
Okay, these are two great questions. So starting with Aida's questions on the gender disparities. So we do a little bit of work in the paper trying to dissect what is going on. Women are more likely to say that they need some training to use the tool. They're also more uncertain about their assessments. So there seems to be some, and this is even within occupation. So now we are comparing two paralegals or something like that, even colleagues. The women are more likely to say that they need some training to use the tool in order to really take advantage of it at work. Maybe they're more cautious in using this tool, and I think that could in itself be a good thing, because we also know that ChatGPT is definitely, you can go very wrong with this tool, that it hallucinates, that it's not clear whether you're allowed to use it, and women may be more cautious with that in those aspects. I want to reference another study, which I think is fascinating and gets to some of the other mechanisms, which was a survey and an experiment done among econ undergrads in Norway, where they gave an experiment where they gave a syllabus to these econ undergrads, and then they varied whether the syllabus explicitly allowed the use of ChatGPT or explicitly disallowed the use of the tool in this course. And they showed that this could almost fully explain the gender gap, in the sense that when the tool is explicitly allowed, both the girls and the boys are equally likely to use it in their coursework. But when it's explicitly banned, women are much more sensitive to that and actually stop using the tool in the courses, whereas still a substantial fraction of the male counterparts still use the tool, despite the fact that it was actually not allowed. So I think there's something here about women maybe being more cautious, maybe for legitimate reasons, but that's also showing up in them not really embracing this tool. So I think, to be honest, the gender gap was a huge surprise for us. We're still trying to fully understand it, and I think there are more work to be done, really finding out what's driving it. So on the organizational barriers to and obstacles, the second questions for using ChatGPT or large language models more generally, I think this is the the main issue now for the adoption of these models is to get firms on board and finding out how to structure the work productively around these tools. I want to say one thing, which is that my sense is that the firms that were earliest to restrict the use of ChatGPT, I think, are the same firms that are the first to develop their in-house models. And these in-house models, I think, will be able to address many of the challenges that ChatGPT imposed, in the sense of, for example, leaking confidential data, or you could train your model on your in-house data, making sure that at least what it recommends and say is consistent with your internal documents and what you know about the specific case. One sector where we see this definitely playing out is the financial sector, that many banks have now developed their own in-house language model. So for example, the largest bank in Denmark is called Danske Bank, and they now have a Danske GPT, which is basically just ChatGPT, that language model, but then it's all in-house, so nothing is shared with OpenAI, and now financial advisors can actually use this tool when they're providing advice to clients. So I think firms are already making progress, and then I think this facilitating the training of employers seems to be a low-hanging fruit to do. But you're right that there are still challenges in the sense of how do you source or how do you reference this tool? How do you make sure its sources are valid? I think there will be more work, even if it can save time for workers in their job tasks. There might be more work to be done now, fact-checking the output and making sure that it still meets the quality standards that different employers and firms want to meet in supplying their products to their clients.
Thanks a lot, Anders, for that. Let me take let me take the next couple of questions. I mean, since we don't have a lot of time, may I ask colleagues to just keep your questions short? I see.
I have a question. Yeah, this is
sorry, Anna. Can I go through the list first, because I see that Habiba and then Marcelo have their hands up first. Let me take those two questions, and then we'll come back to you in the next round. Habiba, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Kumanda. Thank you very much for this the presentation. Very interesting work, and I hope you continue the research. I have two questions very quickly. So first, you mentioned in the beginning that you sent the survey to that government mailbox in Denmark, right? So I was just wondering whether that could have affected the sample, in that people with stronger feelings about this technology, so people who are either very excited or disappointed with the technology, whether they're more likely to respond, whether do you see it in the data. Secondly, what I was very surprised to hear that your finding was that people with less expertise benefit more from this technology, because my experience was quite the opposite. Of course, I'm just one data point. So what I have seen is that, so my impression is that I can only use ChatGPT in an area where I'm an expert, because then I can see the gaps, the shortcomings, the mistakes that ChatGPT makes. I can fix those and use it. At the same time, I have seen people with less experience make those mistakes with confidence, because they don't know those mistakes are there, right? So whether that could have been the case, because you also talked about certainty in the response, right? So whether you see this variation in certainty, so whether more experienced people are less certain than the less experienced people. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's take another question from Marcelo before we give the floor to Anders.
Thank you, Anders, and thank you for the organizers for this excellent event. A very quick question, Anders. I wondered if you were able to track returns to the firm as opposed to the worker. I was curious whether the lack of a result in the returns that you see from a worker level, whether there still might be some additional returns, but it's been captured at the profitability of the firm level, or if that's possible from the data set that you have. Thanks for the excellent paper.
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks.
Anders.
Yeah, great question. So starting on the sample selection issue, so that's of course a key concern and something we spend a lot of pages on in the paper, making sure that this is actually a representative sample. That's the whole goal of this exercise, is to go beyond selected samples, really to get a comprehensive picture. Something that is very nice with the linking it up to the register data is that we can see whether, for example, male workers or younger workers or less experienced workers are more likely to just fill out the survey. And we don't see any of those selection issues. The second thing we do, so it's representative on so-called observables. The second thing we do to also address selection effects is that we gave people a prize, so some money for filling out the survey, but we randomized the amount that these respondents were given. And then we can show that workers who were randomized into a larger price amount were more likely to fill out the survey, but their responses were just similar to everyone else. So I think this is another way to examine selection into this survey, because these workers didn't respond because they were interested in ChatGPT per se. They only responded because they had a higher price money for doing so. And we see that their responses are just similar to the other respondents. So I think on the expertise question, that's an excellent one, and something that is definitely not settled in the literature. There are these RCTs that I talked about, for example, the one published in Science by Noy and Sang, showing that for some tasks, for example, text writing, it does level the playing field in the sense that workers with less experience have more to gain from this tool. But this is in a very controlled setting where we know that ChatGPT was great at that text writing task that they were asked to do. I think going beyond these very plain vanilla tasks, it becomes much less obvious whether expert versus non-expert workers are more likely to benefit from this tool. And I just want to point to that one experiment that I talked about among consultants from BCG, where they varied this job task, and they showed that if it's not a task where ChatGPT is just excels, it's actually you might be worse off from using the tool. And that's exactly where expertise might come in, is to assess whether ChatGPT is actually valuable, whether it's actually providing informative answers. And I think that resonates with your experience, that it requires your personal expertise to really make that assessment. And then Marcelo's questions about the firm outcomes, I think that's an excellent one, and something we're actually looking into right now. It could be that even though we don't see workers earning more, at least in the short run, from this tool, that employers are still able to maybe cut down on unemployment, save some time in terms of their wage bill by now having fewer, for example, customer support agents on staff handling the same number of customer requests. And that's certainly something we can look in the data, and this is definitely ongoing work that we will add in the coming months or two. So yeah, great questions.
Thanks a lot, Anders. I know that we're like 6 minutes over, but are you willing to take maybe one last question?
I'll stay on. Yeah.
All right. Let's take one last question because I think there are still 80 people in this call. So clearly people are very interested in the topic. So we'll take one last question from Amar. Go ahead, Amar.
Thank you very much, Panya, and thank you, Anders, for this presentation. I'll be very short because of the time constraints. I have a couple of questions. One of them is about the context. As you mentioned, Denmark was a very favorable context and conducive and facilitating such study. Has there been any reflection about tools for other contexts? What in less favorable context, not to mention even in kind of developed countries, but even in developing countries, which would be more challenging to conduct such studies? My second question is about the earnings. At this stage, this early stage, there is no kind of impact, as you said, or causality between the adoption of the ChatGPT and the earnings. But could we expect such a thing in 5 years? Maybe the achievers would be more achievers and would earn more, and the laggers would continue to be laggards. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Oh, these are great questions. Yeah. So in the context, I want to say that, of course, it's much harder to do exactly what we did in other contexts. There are surveys starting in the US context. There's a recent survey by Blandin, Big, and Deming that did a representative survey among US workers, actually replicating many of the patterns that we see in this survey, in the sense high adoption rates, especially for ChatGPT, and a substantial gender gap, and also gaps in younger and less experienced workers more likely to use the tool. So there's some evidence there. There's also work by Reuters, where they did also try to do a smaller sample, so 1,000 workers from I think 5 different countries that included definitely included Argentina, actually also Denmark, US, replicating a lot of these patterns. But I totally agree that many of these patterns should definitely try to be replicated and see whether they hold up in other contexts, and in particular in developing context. In some sense, this tool might have larger potentials in these contexts because it's so easy to adopt, and it's right now costlessly, so you don't need a large capital and a lot of fundraising to use this tool at work. So I would be very excited to expand these survey efforts to other countries outside of Denmark or the US. Yeah, and then on the short versus long run, I totally agree with your assessment that right now this is very short run, and there might be many frictions in the labor market that prevents these time savings to really manifest into higher earnings. And I think it's a total open question whether in 5 years' times these adopters are then starting to diverge and really outperform the non-adopters in the labor market. And that's why I think we should still be very worried about, for example, the gender gap that we see in the use of ChatGPT, in the sense that even if the women are not earning less right now due to ChatGPT, the fact that they're not on the train and really part of leading the adoption curve might later on really hurt their potential earnings in the labor market down the road in 5 years' time, as you say.
Well, thank you, Ander. I mean, for such an interesting topic. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time. We still have a lot of other questions, but I hope in the future we may be able to revisit it again once you have basically more research on this to share. But for now, I would like to thank you again so much for taking the time. For those who don't know, Anders had a very early start today because you're in Chicago, so probably we started at 7:30 your time in the morning. So thank you for taking the time to speak to the global network. And if possible, may I ask the participants to just unmute yourself, turn on your cameras, and join me in giving a big round of applause for Anders for speaking to us today. Thank you so much, Anders, and best wishes for the research.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. See you at the next Global Network webinar. Have a great day. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Colleagues.